Ancient architects built identical monuments thousands of miles apart. The sheer scale of their coordination is a mystery that defies our modern assumptions. This video uncovers the hidden organizational systems behind coordinated multi-region monument construction, revealing how prehistoric societies achieved architectural harmony across continents. By the end, you will understand the 10 sophisticated frameworks that made these stone wonders possible, from celestial calendars to global trade networks. We will explore how a shared vision could guide builders who never met, and how a single unit of measurement might link a Scottish stone circle to a temple in the Mediterranean. What does it truly mean to build in concert with a world you cannot see? A druid in ancient Gaul could walk into a sacred grove in distant Galatia and recognize the ritual. Across the vast expanse of Europe, from the misty shores of Ireland to the highlands of Anatolia, the Celtic peoples presented a fascinating puzzle. They were not a single empire under one ruler, but a tapestry of often rival tribes. Yet their sacred spaces, their stone circles and woodland sanctuaries carried a family resemblance. This was possible because of something far more powerful than an emperor's decree. It was a shared vision, a common understanding of how the world worked and humanity's place within it. This is our first and most essential system, the foundational blueprint that made everything else possible, a unifying ideology. Before any stone was quarried or any posthole dug, this shared belief system provided the invisible plan. Archaeologists point to the Druidic tradition as the key. These spiritual leaders, philosophers, and astronomers served as the keepers of a common knowledge. They shared a cosmology, stories about the origins of the world, and a deep reverence for specific celestial events. This shared mythology did not come with detailed architectural schematics. Instead, it provided a symbolic language. It established what was important, what needed to be commemorated, and how the sacred should interact with the landscape and the sky. Think of it not as a builder's manual, but as a set of profound principles. A community in Britain, guided by these principles, would align their stone circle to the midsummer sunrise. A community hundreds of miles away in Central Europe, following the same celestial beliefs, would do the exact same thing. They were working from the same non-physical blueprint. So how does a shared belief actually translate into physical stone? The ideology answers the why and the what for. It provides the common purpose. When disparate groups are united by a powerful why, the how begins to organically align. The need to honor a specific deity, to mark a solar event, or to create a gateway to the otherworld dictates the monument's form and orientation. This shared vision becomes the glue that allows for decentralized action. There is no need for a central site manager to travel between regions because every local spiritual leader already understands the goal. They are all reading from the same spiritual text, even if they are in different chapters. This framework ensured that monuments, built independently over centuries, still spoke the same architectural language. They felt part of a greater whole because they were conceived from the same foundational idea. Without this shared ideology, the stunning coordination we see across continents simply could not have begun. It is the silent first command, the common dream that made separate hands work in concert. But a dream alone cannot move a 10-ton megalith. It requires a more tangible kind of language, one that builders' hands could understand and replicate across vast distances. A shared vision gave the world its purpose, but the stones themselves demanded a different kind of language. This was the language of the chisel, the plumb line, and the measuring cord. It was carried not in sacred stories, but in the calloused hands and sharp eyes of a unique class of individual, the mobile master builder. These were the elite technicians of the ancient world, often part of secretive guilds that functioned as the living libraries of architectural knowledge. While communities provided the labor and the local materials, it was these traveling experts who provided the precision. They were the human network that transformed a unifying ideology into a unified architectural reality. Evidence for this system is etched into the stones themselves. Archaeologists have found identical stonemasons' marks, specific symbols used to denote workmanship or assembly order, on monuments in distant locations like Britain and the Mediterranean. These are not random scratches, they are the signature of a shared craft tradition, a technical dialect that only initiates would understand. It suggests that specialized teams or individuals from those teams moved between major projects. They carried with them a complete mental toolkit, techniques passed down through generations within closed guilds. This knowledge was sacred and practical, covering everything from selecting the right stone in a quarry to shaping it with stone hammers to the final, delicate act of positioning it under the stars. Perhaps most importantly, they carried the secrets of alignment and engineering. The precise astronomical orientation of a stone circle, or the clever use of counterweights and ramps to lift a massive lintel, were not rediscovered by every new village. These were sophisticated solutions developed, refined, and guarded by master builders. When such a builder arrived at a new site, he brought centuries of accumulated wisdom with him. He could instruct local workers on the exact method, ensuring that a temple in Anatolia and a tomb in Iberia, though built by different hands, achieved the same flawless joinery or the same resonant acoustic property within its chamber. This guild system created a consistent quality and style across continents. It meant that a community did not have to invent monumental architecture from scratch. They could commission it, participating in a grand tradition by hosting a master who knew the rules. The stones might be local, but the intelligence that arranged them was global, walking on 2 feet from one sacred site to the next. Yet, even the most skilled builder needs to know how big to make something. How do you ensure that 2 pillars, carved 1,000 miles apart, will fit perfectly when they finally meet? The master builder carried the methods, but the stones themselves held a silent code of numbers. Across the silent, wind-swept moors of Scotland, a 20th century engineer named Alexander Thom made a startling observation. He surveyed hundreds of ancient stone circles with meticulous care, and a pattern emerged from the chaos. The diameters, the spacings between stones, the perimeters, they were not random. They seemed to be built in multiples of a single precise unit, a length he called the megalithic yard. This unit, roughly 2.72 of our modern feet, appeared again and again, from the remote Orkney Islands all the way to the coast of Brittany in France. It was as if every builder across centuries and seas had been issued the same invisible ruler. This discovery points to our second critical system, standardized units of measurement and geometry, the universal technical language of the ancient world. How does a unit become standard across a continent without a central authority? The answer often lies in the human body and the heavens above. Many ancient measures are based on simple, reproducible proportions. The Egyptian cubit came from the length of a forearm. A fathom was the span of a man's outstretched arms. These were measures anyone could recreate, using their own body as a template. But the megalithic yard is more intriguing. Some researchers suggest it was derived from astronomical observation, perhaps a fraction of the pendulum swing that marks a precise interval of time. Others propose it came from a careful study of the human pace or a specific mathematical ratio found in nature. However it originated, its widespread adoption created something powerful, a common vocabulary for scale. Think of it like this: if you and I are collaborating on a project but can never meet, we need to agree on what an inch is before we start. If my inch and your inch are different, nothing will fit together. The ancient builders solved this problem definitively. By all using the megalithic yard, a planner in one region could conceive a design, and builders 1,000 miles away could execute it perfectly because they understood the basic unit of construction. This allowed for a modular, almost prefabricated approach. A stone could be shaped to be exactly 5 megalithic yards long, confident that it would slot into a space designed for that multiple. This geometric language enabled the breathtaking precision we see in alignments. To track the sun's slow drift along the horizon, you need exquisitely accurate sightlines. Using a standard unit allowed builders to translate complex astronomical calculations into physical distances on the ground. They could say, place the central stone exactly 72 of these units from the observation stone, and every community following the system would achieve the same celestial alignment. The geometry itself, circles, ellipses, and Pythagorean triangles found in these sites, further suggests a shared body of mathematical knowledge. This was not mere intuition, it was applied science. The standardized unit was the key that unlocked this precision across cultures, turning sacred intention into mathematical certainty and allowing separate hands to build as one. But knowledge and measurement are one thing, moving the mountains they describe is another. The grandest designs required a workforce of thousands and a mountain of supplies. The precision of a shared measurement could dictate the size of a stone, but it could not dictate the moment to raise it. That command came from a source far above any human king, written in the slow, turning script of the night sky. High on the Salisbury Plain, the builders of Stonehenge would have watched, year after year, for the sun to touch its farthest point on the horizon. At the same moment, though they could never know it, priests along the Nile were preparing for their own solar ceremonies. They were all reading from the same celestial calendar. This is our third system, the use of astronomical knowledge as a perfect, decentralized scheduling tool. In a world without printed calendars or instant communication, the heavens provided a flawless, universal timetable. Solstices, equinoxes, the helical rising of certain stars, these were events visible to everyone, everywhere. By tying the phases of their construction to these cosmic markers, separated communities could synchronize their efforts across continents. The foundational trench for a temple might be dug at the spring equinox, a time symbolizing new beginnings across many cultures. The capstone, the most significant piece, might be raised at the summer solstice, the peak of the sun's power. This created a natural rhythm to monumental work. It meant that during the winter months when certain stars were dominant, quarries in different regions might all be most active, cutting stones under the same long nights. Then, as the sun reached its zenith, those stones would be raised in ceremonies from the Americas to Asia. This was more than practical scheduling, it was ritual synchronization. The act of building became a form of worship timed to the heartbeat of the universe itself. A community in Mexico lifting a stela to mark the zenith sun was, in a profound sense, participating in the same act as a community in Cambodia aligning a temple corridor. They were answering the same celestial cue. This shared cosmic timetable fostered a powerful psychological unity. Though separated by vast distances, builders could feel they were part of a grand, ordered process much larger than their local tribe or kingdom. They were working in concert with the fundamental laws of nature. The sky, therefore, was not just a map for alignment, it was the project manager's Gantt chart, the sacred deadline that coordinated human ambition on a planetary scale. It ensured that the sacred landscape of Earth grew in harmony with the cosmos. But to read the sky, you need more than just eyes. You need a system to record and transmit what you have seen. The stones for Stonehenge did not come from the hill where they stand. Some were dragged over 20 miles, others sailed and hauled from mountains in Wales over 150 miles away. This journey of the blue stones reveals a truth far beyond mere effort. It reveals a continent already connected by invisible threads of commerce. This is our fourth system, the vast network of trade routes and material logistics that formed the physical circulatory system of the ancient world. Long before kings dreamed of empires, people were trading. Obsidian from Anatolia found its way to the Levant. Baltic amber was treasured in Mycenaean Greece. Tin from Cornwall was essential for bronze across Europe. These routes, established for precious commodities, became the information superhighways of their age. They were the channels through which not just goods but ideas, stories, and technical knowledge could flow. When a community decided to build a monument, they tapped directly into this existing, sophisticated web. The procurement of specific, often non-local materials was not a frantic scramble. It was a coordinated operation using a pre-tested supply chain. Consider the giant Moai statues of Easter Island. Their distinctive red stone topknots, or pukao, were quarried from a single volcanic crater several miles away from where the bodies were carved. This required a separate, parallel logistics operation to extract, transport, and lift these massive cylinders onto the statues' heads. It was a feat of project management, dividing tasks and resources across different sites and teams. Similarly, Egyptian pharaohs sourced cedar from the forests of Lebanon, floating the mighty logs down the coast in great flotillas. This was not a one-time expedition, it was a recurring, institutionalized process. These trade routes did more than move weight, they moved people. A merchant traveling from the Aegean to Britain with a cargo of fine pottery would have carried news. He might have mentioned a new temple design popular in the East, or a clever lever system used to move columns. Skilled laborers, perhaps master builders from our earlier system, would have traveled these very roads and sea lanes, offering their services from one monumental project to the next. The route itself became a conduit for the very style and technique of construction. Furthermore, the materials themselves carried symbolic power. Using a distinctive stone from a distant, perhaps sacred, location added spiritual value to the monument. It physically connected the local site to a far-off power place. The act of transporting it became a ritual in itself, a pilgrimage of stone that involved entire communities along the route. This created a cultural and material ecosystem. The demand for monumental stone could stimulate and strengthen trade networks, which in turn spread the cultural ideas that made people want to build more monuments. It was a self-reinforcing cycle. The trade route ensured that a temple in Greece and a tomb in Ireland, though using different local stones, might share the same architectural concept for a doorway or the same symbolic spiral carving, because the concept had traveled the same path as the tin and the amber. The stones could speak to each other across the miles because the roads between them were already alive with conversation. A spiral carved into a stone in Ireland tells the same silent story as one etched into a temple wall on a Mediterranean island. These are not mere decorations, they are a language. This brings us to the fifth system, the powerful use of a shared symbolic language and iconographic templates, a non-verbal communication network that spanned continents. In a world of countless dialects and tongues, a geometric pattern or a stylized animal figure could convey complex ideas instantly without a single spoken word. This system allowed the core message of a monument to travel, ensuring its meaning was understood by anyone within that cultural sphere, regardless of their local language. The spiral is a perfect example. At Newgrange in Ireland, it swirls on entrance stones, perhaps representing the journey of the sun, the cycle of seasons, or the path of life itself. Thousands of miles away, the same motif appears in the ancient temples of Malta. It is highly unlikely that a Maltese builder ever visited Ireland or vice versa. Yet they both employed this powerful symbol. This suggests the spiral was part of a shared symbolic vocabulary, a concept that had diffused across Europe through those same trade routes and mobile master builders. It was a code that transmitted meaning directly to the human psyche. These recurring symbols acted as both affirmation and instruction. A pilgrim approaching a sacred site and seeing familiar iconography would immediately feel a sense of belonging, a recognition that this place was part of their wider spiritual world. For the builders, these symbols served as a template. They provided a set of artistic rules about what was important to depict, whether it was the spiral, a concentric circle, a zigzag representing water, or a specific horned deity. These icons formed a visual canon. By adhering to this canon, a community could ensure their local monument communicated correctly. It was like following a sacred recipe, where the core ingredients had to be present for the ritual to work. This system brilliantly allowed for local expression within a universal framework. The core symbol remained constant, but the style of its execution could vary. A spiral in one region might be deeply carved and bold, while in another it might be a delicate, shallow inscription. The scale could change, the surrounding patterns could differ, but the essential message of the spiral was intact. This flexibility is what made the system so durable and widespread. It did not require rigid conformity, just an understanding of the key symbols. This iconographic language also served a practical, instructional purpose for construction itself. Certain symbols might indicate directional alignment, mark an astronomically significant stone, or denote a chamber meant for a specific type of offering. They were a permanent set of notes etched into the architecture, guiding both future priests and the builders during construction. This shared visual vocabulary meant that a skilled artisan from one region could arrive at a building site in another and immediately understand the symbolic program. He would know where to place the carvings and what they should depict to make the monument spiritually potent. The stones themselves, through their symbols, were in constant dialogue with each other, broadcasting a unified message of identity, belief, and cosmic order across thousands of miles. This silent language ensured that even if the spoken words were lost, the stone would continue to speak. But who held the authority to dictate this sacred vocabulary and ensure its rules were followed? A shared symbol could convey meaning, but how did you convey the command to begin? Across the vast, roadless stretches of the Andes, an Inca administrator needed to know how many potatoes were stored in a distant warehouse, or how many workers were needed for a new terrace. He did not send a letter, for there was no writing as we know it. Instead, he consulted a quipu, a complex array of knotted cords where the position, color, and type of knot recorded numbers, and many scholars believe even narrative information. This points to a profound sixth system, the development of sophisticated communication protocols in a pre-literate world. How do you coordinate a multi-region construction project without a single written memo? The ancient world had answers that relied on human ingenuity, memory, and movement. One of the most direct methods was the dedicated messenger. The Inca, masters of their mountainous empire, maintained a network of relay runners called chasquis. Stationed in huts a few miles apart along the magnificent royal roads, a runner would sprint his segment, shout the memorized message to the next fresh runner, and the news could travel over 100 miles in a single day. This was a living, breathing information network, a human telegraph system that could carry urgent orders or status reports from one construction site to a central planner. For less urgent but wider communication, visual signals came into play. Smoke by day or beacon fires by night could transmit pre-arranged codes across long sightlines from hilltop to hilltop. A column of smoke from a coastal temple might signal the successful arrival of a seaborne stone shipment, triggering the inland quarry to begin its next phase of work. These methods handled the immediate logistical commands, but what about the complex, unchanging instructions, the architectural plans and sacred rituals that needed perfect preservation across generations? This is where the power of the human voice and memory reached its zenith. In cultures from the Celtic Druids to the Polynesian navigators, vast troves of knowledge were encoded in poetry, song, and chanted verse. The rhythmic, repetitive structure of epic poems made them unforgettable. A bard or priest might carry in his mind not just myths, but the precise formulas for mixing ceremonial plaster, the correct astronomical alignments for a temple, or the genealogies that justified a king's building project. These oral archives were living libraries, and their custodians were the vital data storage devices of their time. The act of recitation was also a powerful tool for coordination in the moment. Imagine the scene at a megalithic site. 100 people are gripping ropes attached to a massive capstone. Success requires a perfectly synchronized heave. A rhythm keeper, perhaps a priest, would begin a chant with a strong, predictable beat. The pullers would feel that rhythm through their feet and in their bones, and on the decisive beat, they would all pull as one. The chant transformed a crowd into a single, powerful machine. This principle of ritualized movement extended to the very landscape. Pilgrimage routes to sacred sites became natural communication channels. A family traveling to a distant oracle or festival would carry news. They might share stories of a new building technique seen in the last valley, or a famine that had delayed work in another region. The pilgrimage itself was a cultural circulatory system, with people as the blood cells carrying information from the heart of one community to the next. These protocols, from the sprinting chasqui to the chanting priest, reveal that communication in the ancient world was not primitive. It was a multi-layered, highly adaptive system that leveraged human biology, social ritual, and the geography itself. It ensured that a complex vision could be shouted across mountains, sung across centuries, and pulled into reality by 100 voices moving as one. Yet for all this coordination, someone still had to manage the resources, to ensure that the quarry had enough workers and the workers had enough food. The ocean was their highway and the horizon their shared boundary. Along the wild western edges of Europe, from the sun-baked shores of Portugal to the storm-lashed islands of Scotland, a stone language was spoken for thousands of years. This is the world of the Atlantic megalithic culture, a breathtaking case study in coordination without a central capital. Scattered across this immense coastline are tens of thousands of monuments, dolmens that stand like stone tables, towering solitary menhirs, and passage graves where dark corridors lead to ceremonial chambers. They feel strangely familiar to one another, as if built by the same hand, yet they were raised by communities separated by treacherous seas and mountain ranges. How did this happen? The evidence is in the design. Take the classic passage grave, from Newgrange in Ireland to Micho in Orkney, and down to Anta Grande do Zambujeiro in Portugal, you find the same architectural template, a long, narrow entrance passage leading to a central, often cruciform, chamber roofed by colossal capstones. This was not a random shape. The passages are frequently aligned to the rising sun of the winter solstice, a single, profound astronomical event that held meaning for every community along this vast seaboard. They were all building calendars in stone, watching for the same moment of celestial rebirth. The materials tell another part of the story. While most stones were sourced locally, certain projects demanded something special. The distinctive blue-spotted dolerite of Stonehenge's inner circle was quarried from the Preseli Hills in Wales, a journey of over 150 miles that likely involved both land and sea. This was not an isolated feat. All along the Atlantic coast, we see the selective use of distinctive, often difficult to acquire rock types, suggesting that the effort of transport was part of the monument's sacred purpose. So what bound these far-flung coastal villages together? They were not a unified empire, but a network, a cultural zone connected by the sea itself. Maritime travel, though dangerous, was often easier than trekking through dense, uncharted inland forests. Ideas, people, and stones could move by boat, hopping from river mouth to sheltered bay. Shared cosmology provided the blueprint, a common reverence for ancestors and the cycles of the sun and moon. Mobile master builders, perhaps specialists in the complex art of corbelling stone to create a vaulted roof, would have traveled these sea routes, offering their essential skills. The winter solstice alignment acted as a perfect, decentralized instruction, a celestial deadline every community understood, and the trade in special stones or rare artifacts for offerings reinforced those connections. This was a symphony played by independent villages, but they were all reading from the same celestial score. They proved that monumental coordination does not require a pharaoh's command, but can arise from a shared vision, carried on the waves and etched into the landscape by 1,000 hands working to the same rhythm of the sky. While the Atlantic builders worked in a chorus of independent voices, another system was being perfected under a single commanding conductor. Far to the south, along the life-giving ribbon of the Nile, the desert sands hold the blueprint for a different kind of power. Here, pyramids do not stand alone. They rise in great, ordered fields, a silent city of triangles stretching for hundreds of miles from the delta down into the heart of Nubia. This is not a collection of individual projects. It is a single, multi-generational mission, orchestrated by the most sophisticated state-level bureaucracy the ancient world had yet seen. The Old Kingdom of Egypt presents our ultimate case study in centralized coordination. This was a system built not on shared belief alone, but on the unshakable authority of a god-king and the meticulous written records of a vast administrative machine. At the top sat the pharaoh, the living incarnation of order, but the real engine of construction was the office of the vizier, the king's chief minister. This was the ancient world's equivalent of a combined department of the interior, treasury, and labor, all rolled into one. The vizier's scribes did not deal in whispers or chants. They wrote everything down. They recorded the daily bread ration for a work crew in the limestone quarries of Tura. They inventoried the copper chisels shipped from the mines of the Sinai. They tracked the progress of each course of stone as it rose on the pyramid's face. This was a command economy dedicated to a single, sacred output, the eternal resting place of the king. To manage the colossal workforce, the Egyptians developed a brilliant organizational structure, the labor corps known as files. These were not slaves toiling under a whip, a popular myth modern archaeology has thoroughly dispelled. They were skilled workers, often farmers who contributed their labor during the inundation season when the Nile flooded their fields and farming was impossible. The state divided them into rotating crews, each with its own identity, name, and even a kind of team spirit. Records show they took names like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaura. These files worked in shifts, perhaps 3 months on, then returning home. This system provided a predictable, renewable, and highly motivated labor pool. It turned a seasonal agricultural pause into a national project. The logistics of material sourcing reached an industrial scale. While the core limestone might come from nearby cliffs, the finest casing stones were sailed from quarries over 400 miles upriver at Aswan. Imagine the operation: a fleet of barges loaded with immense granite blocks drifting down the Nile on the current. Their journey was timed to the river's own rhythm, the annual flood, which raised the water level and made transporting these monstrous weights possible. At the pyramid site, a purpose-built harbor awaited them, the first node in a dedicated delivery network. This was supply chain management written on papyrus. Every element was scheduled, every resource allocated by a central plan. The inundation was not just a natural event. It was the kingdom's fiscal and logistical calendar. When the waters rose, the quarries and transport routes were at their peak activity. When they receded, the focus shifted to the precise fitting and finishing work on the plateau. This hierarchical, written command system achieved a level of uniformity and precision that is staggering. The pyramids at Giza, built over the span of a century by different kings, align with each other and with cardinal directions with almost machined accuracy. This coherence was the direct product of a powerful central authority that could draft plans, issue standard measures like the royal cubit, and deploy resources across the entire kingdom. It presents a stark contrast to the decentralized Atlantic model. There, harmony emerged from a common idea. Here, harmony was imposed by a flawless, top-down plan. Yet both systems, in their own ways, solved the same fundamental puzzle: how to make countless individual acts of labor add up to a single, immortal statement in stone. One used the shared sky as a guide, the other used the decrees of a god-king. Both required a genius for organization that still whispers to us from the silent desert and the windswept moor. The Nile's command economy and the Atlantic's shared sky represent two poles of organization, but a third, more fluid system moved between them, powered by the human foot and the yearning heart. This was the power of pilgrimage, the ritual journey that transformed travel itself into a mighty coordination mechanism. Forget the quiet, solitary traveler of modern thought. In the ancient world, pilgrimage was a mass migration, a seasonal pulse of humanity that flowed along established paths toward a sacred center. These were not just journeys of faith, they were the annual conferences, trade fairs, and planning summits of their age. When diverse populations from distant valleys and coasts converged on a site like Stonehenge or the Oracle at Delphi, they brought more than offerings, they brought news. A builder from the north might share a new lever design for moving megaliths. A quarryman from the east could demonstrate a more efficient technique for splitting stone. In the temporary city of tents and fires that sprang up around the monument, knowledge was traded as actively as goods. This gathering created a super community, a melting pot of dialects and traditions united by a common purpose. Here, under the watch of the stones, labor agreements could be forged. A chieftain needing extra hands for a new ceremonial platform might recruit whole families from another region, sealing the deal with ritual feasts and exchanges. Architectural innovation spread not through scrolls but through lived experience. A pilgrim who walked the long passage into Newgrange and saw the winter solstice light pierce the darkness would carry that breathtaking engineering concept home in their memory, a seed for future inspiration. The pilgrimage route itself became a physical map of this network. The journey was often punctuated by waypoint monuments, smaller stone circles, burial mounds, or carved standing stones. These markers served as ritual rest stops, but also as constant reminders of the connected landscape. They turned the entire cultural territory into a living, interconnected system under continuous development. To travel the path was to trace the lines of communication and shared identity that bound scattered communities together. Each waypoint reinforced the message: you are still within the sacred geography, you are still part of the project. This system ensured coordination was not a top-down order or an abstract idea, but a lived, annual rhythm. People planned their year around the pilgrimage. The harvest had to be in, supplies prepared, tools sharpened. The journey to the center and back was a reset for the entire cultural cycle. It synchronized not just calendars, but human energy and intention. When they returned home, they carried updated blueprints in their minds, renewed social bonds, and a shared vision for the work ahead. The monument at the center was not an end point, but a generator, a beating heart that sent pulses of coordinated action radiating back out along every pilgrim's path, season after season, generation after generation. The stones were placed not just upon the earth, but because of it. To walk the landscape where ancient monuments stand is to feel a subtle pull, a sense that these locations were chosen not at random, but through a deep, felt knowledge of the ground beneath their feet. This brings us to a sixth, often invisible system, the art of hydrological and geomantic planning, where the Earth's own energies, waterways, and contours became the ultimate blueprint. For many ancient cultures, the land was not a passive stage, but a living, breathing entity. Its veins were the rivers and underground streams, its bones were the mountain ridges, and its vital energy flowed along specific pathways. The practice of sensing and mapping these flows is known as geomancy, the sacred geography that guided builders across continents. In China, this knowledge was formalized into the practice of feng shui, the art of placement. Masters would seek the dragon lines, the invisible currents of terrestrial energy, and place important structures upon them to harness prosperity and harmony. A tomb, a temple, or a palace was positioned not just for a good view, but to be in alignment with these powerful earth forces. A similar concept appears in the West with the idea of ley lines, straight alignments that some researchers suggest connect ancient sacred sites across the British countryside. Whether these lines were formally mapped or intuitively felt, the principle reveals a shared understanding. The land itself had a structure, and building in concert with that structure was essential. This geomantic logic provided a powerful, decentralized guide for site selection. A community seeking to build a new ceremonial center would send out seers or surveyors to find a location that felt right, one that resonated with these terrestrial energies. Because this knowledge was shared across a cultural region, different communities acting independently would often be drawn to the same types of locations: hilltops with specific shapes, points where three rivers met, or ridges that mirrored the shape of a constellation. This is why we so often find monuments in visually striking, energetically potent places. They were all following the same earthly script. The most tangible expression of this system was water. Access to specific water sources was non-negotiable for both practical and spiritual reasons. On a purely functional level, construction on a monumental scale required vast amounts of water for mixing clay mortars, for cooling stone tools during carving, and for the sustenance of the large workforce. But water held a deeper, sacred significance. It was the element of life, purification, and the boundary to the other world. Monuments were frequently placed directly over underground aquifers or at the confluence of two rivers, locations seen as portals of heightened power. This created a hidden hydrological network. A sacred spring feeding one temple might be connected by an underground water table to a river that flowed past another monument 50 miles away. In the minds of the builders, these sites were literally linked by the living water beneath the soil, part of a single, flowing system. This earth-based planning meant coordination was baked into the landscape itself. You did not need to send a messenger to tell another village where to build, because if they understood the principles of sacred geography, they would naturally be drawn to the corresponding power node in their own territory. The river confluence in one valley and the sacred spring in the next mountain over were understood to be siblings, part of the same terrestrial family. Building upon them created a harmonic resonance across the land, a chord struck in stone that echoed through the Earth's own network. The monument was not an isolated object, but a keystone in a vast, living lattice of energy and water, a conscious collaboration with the very body of the world. A powerful idea, once built, becomes a magnet for the human imagination. Across the deserts of Egypt, the perfect geometry of the Great Pyramid stood not just as a tomb, but as a symbol of cosmic order made solid. Its fame spread on the whispers of merchants and the reports of diplomats, traveling far beyond the Nile's reach. In distant lands, rulers and priests heard tales of this mountain of stone that touched the sky, and a profound desire took root. They wanted one of their own. This introduces our seventh system, the inheritance of template monuments, where a single, iconic structure becomes an archetype to be replicated, a master copy from which all others draw inspiration. This was not about slavish imitation, but about capturing the essence of a revered original, creating a system of architectural homage that connected cultures through shared aspiration. The process worked through the flow of information along established channels. A visiting ambassador from a foreign court might witness the grandeur of the Egyptian pyramid complex. He would not see the detailed engineering plans, but he would absorb the overwhelming impression, the sense of scale, the precise orientation, the awe it inspired. Returning home, he would describe it to his own king and architects. Those local builders, armed with this second-hand description and their own cultural toolkit, would then attempt to recreate the feeling and the symbolic power of the original. The result was not a duplicate but an interpretation. We see this clearly with pyramids themselves. While the smooth-sided, true pyramids are quintessentially Egyptian, the stepped pyramid form appears independently in Mesopotamia at the ziggurat of Ur, and millennia later in the temples of Mesoamerica. These are not evidence of direct contact, but of a shared human solution to a shared human problem: how to build a symbolic mountain, a stairway to the heavens. The template provided the concept, the stairway, and each culture engineered its own version. A more direct example of homage can be found in the biblical world. The Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, though long gone, became the ultimate architectural prototype in Judeo-Christian tradition. Its described proportions, its division into sacred chambers, and its symbolic features were studied for centuries. Later structures, from the great medieval cathedrals of Europe to modern places of worship, consciously reference its layout and symbolism. Builders were not trying to rebuild Solomon's temple stone for stone. They were weaving its sacred geometry into new forms, claiming a spiritual lineage through architectural language. This system allowed for the rapid diffusion of engineering breakthroughs. The Roman arch is a classic template. Once perfected, its form and the principle of distributing weight were so effective that it became a standard feature, spreading across the empire and beyond. A local builder in Roman Gaul constructing an aqueduct was using a template developed in Rome, a solved problem that he could apply in his own context. This inheritance saved immense time and resources, allowing sophisticated engineering to leapfrog across continents. The template monument, therefore, acted as a cultural seed. It carried within it compressed information about aesthetics, spirituality, power, and technology. A ruler building a scaled-down version of a famous foreign monument was making a powerful statement. It meant, we are part of that great tradition, we understand that grand vision. It created family resemblances among structures whose builders never met, linked not by politics or trade, but by a common dream of perfection, a shared glance toward a distant, inspiring peak that told them what was possible to achieve in stone. The final stone in a monument was not just placed by hands, but by hearts bound together in common purpose. While master builders provided the skill and trade routes delivered the materials, the true engine of construction was human will, mobilized on a staggering scale. This brings us to the profound social systems that turned back-breaking labor into a sacred duty, transforming whole populations into a willing, rotating workforce. The most famous example comes from the Andes, where the Inca Empire perfected a system called the mitre. This was not slavery, but a form of labor tax, a civic obligation owed to the state. For a set period each year, communities would send a portion of their able-bodied members to work on state projects, building roads, terraces, or magnificent stone structures like Sacsayhuaman. In return, the state provided food, drink, and often festive occasions during the work. This system created a predictable, renewable pool of labor drawn from a vast geographic catchment area, ensuring that no single community was overburdened, and that work proceeded continuously as fresh crews rotated in. It was a brilliant social contract that tied the prosperity of the individual directly to the grandeur of the collective. Across the world, similar systems operated on a more local, yet equally powerful, level. Think of the traditional barn raising in many agricultural societies. A community would come together for a concentrated burst of effort to build something essential for a neighbor, knowing that the favor would be returned. This work-bee model, fueled by shared meals, music, and camaraderie, turned labor into a social event. Monumental construction often scaled this concept upward. The raising of a great menhir or the digging of a henge ditch could be framed as a communal festival, a sacred holiday from normal life. Religious obligation provided the most potent motivation of all. To contribute to a temple or a tomb was to earn spiritual merit, to secure favor from the gods or the ancestors. This transformed the blisters and the strain into acts of devotion. A farmer might willingly spend his off-season hauling stones, believing he was building a staircase to the heavens for his entire people. These social frameworks ensured participation was not just extracted, but often enthusiastically given. They rewarded labor with intangible but vital currencies: honor, a sense of belonging, spiritual security, and the tangible reward of a great feast at the project's completion. The monument itself became the ultimate symbol of this social investment. It was not merely a thing they built, it was a memory made solid, a testament to the season when the entire region came together and achieved the impossible. The bonds forged in that shared effort, the stories told over shared meals, wove a stronger social fabric than any wall. This is how organizational systems were embedded deep within the human heart, making the act of building together as important as the final, silent stone. The social bonds that raised the stones were held together by a deeper thread, a living chain of memory. In a world without blueprints or textbooks, the true repository for monumental knowledge was not a library, but the human mind itself. How could something as precise as astronomical alignment or complex stone corbelling survive intact for 1,000 years? The answer lies in a remarkable eighth system, the oral archives and initiation schools that functioned as the ancient world's universities and living databases. At the heart of many ceremonial landscapes, places like Stonehenge or the great temple complexes of Malta, there may have been more than just a site for ritual. Scholars suggest these were also centers of learning, initiation schools where a select few were entrusted with the community's most vital technical and spiritual secrets. Admission was not for everyone. It required a calling, a demonstrated aptitude, and likely years of dedicated preparation. Once inside this rigorous intellectual environment, initiates underwent a transformation. Their curriculum was immersive and total. Geometry was not a dry subject on a slate, but a sacred language revealed through patterns drawn in sand or traced in the night sky. Astronomy was learned through endless nights of observation, memorizing the slow dance of stars and planets, and linking their movements to stories that encoded agricultural cycles and architectural alignment. The principles of acoustics, so important for creating resonant chambers within tombs, might be taught through chant and the study of how sound traveled through specific stone formations. This knowledge was not stored in books. It was woven into epic poems, encoded in complex mythologies, and reinforced through ritual reenactment. The student learned by listening, repeating, and doing, forging neural pathways as durable as the stone they would one day shape. The master-apprentice relationship was the core of this system. An experienced builder or priest would guide a novice through every stage, from selecting the right grain in a rock to the final consecration of a finished monument. This hands-on apprenticeship ensured that tacit knowledge, the kind of intuitive skill that cannot be written down, was passed directly from one generation to the next. It was quality control for the very soul of the tradition. Upon completion of this lengthy training, the graduate did not simply stay at the center, they dispersed. Carrying this canon of knowledge within them, they traveled back to their home regions or were sent to new territories as project leaders. A single initiate from a central school could ensure that a stone circle built in a remote highland valley adhered to the same geometric and astronomical principles as one built on a coastal plain. This created a distributed intellectual network, a living cloud of standardized knowledge. Each graduate was a node in this network, holding an identical copy of the cultural software. They could communicate with each other using a shared technical and symbolic language, ensuring that innovation at one site could be carefully evaluated and integrated into the tradition elsewhere. This system of oral archives and initiation schools provided incredible stability. It protected the knowledge from the decay of parchment or the sacking of a city. As long as the chain of teachers and students remained unbroken, the knowledge lived. It allowed for a sophisticated tradition to flow across geography and time, carried in the songs, stories, and skilled hands of those who devoted their lives to remembering, so that the stones would never forget their purpose. The memory of a master builder held the sacred geometry, but his hands needed a way to translate that vision into countless identical stones. This leads us to a brilliantly pragmatic eighth system, modular design and prefabrication, the ancient world's method for turning monumental construction into a manageable, repeatable process. Imagine these great structures not as singular sculptures, but as giant, sophisticated stone kits. The evidence for this is etched into the monuments themselves, in the form of standardized, often pre-shaped components designed to fit together according to a master template. Look at Stonehenge. Its iconic outer circle and inner horseshoe are composed of trilithons, each a set of two vertical stones capped by a horizontal lintel. While each trilithon is massive, their design is modular. The mortise and tenon joints, the bumps on top of the uprights that slot into holes in the lintels, are essentially identical. This suggests the stones were not rough-hewn on site and then painstakingly matched. Instead, they were likely shaped at the quarry or a nearby workshop to precise, interchangeable specifications. The quarry workers had a simple, repeatable task: produce another upright with a tenon of this exact size, or another lintel with a matching socket. They didn't need to understand the full celestial alignment of the finished circle. They just needed to follow the template for their specific part. This modular approach revolutionized logistics. It allowed work to be decentralized and parallelized. Specialized quarries could focus on mass-producing one type of component. Transport became more efficient because you were moving known, shaped units rather than unpredictable, raw monoliths. Most importantly, it drastically reduced the risk and complexity of the final assembly. The on-site builders, who might have been a different crew from the quarry workers, simply had to follow the assembly manual, slotting the pre-made pieces together like a three-dimensional puzzle. We see this principle in other ancient civilizations as well. In the Mycenaean citadels of Greece, like the famous Lion Gate at Mycenae, the massive stone blocks are often cut in consistent sizes and shapes. The relieving triangle above the lintel, a space designed to divert weight, is a perfect geometric void created by precisely shaped surrounding stones. This is not haphazard piling, it is a prefabricated architectural solution. Similarly, the intricate interlocking stonework of Inca walls, where polygonal blocks fit together without mortar, relies on a library of pre-dressed stone shapes that could be trial-fitted and adjusted off-site before final placement. This system transformed coordination from a mystery into a manageable workflow. A central planner, perhaps a priest architect, could devise the overall design and then send out templates, maybe wooden models or chord measurements, to multiple quarries. Each quarry became a factory for a specific part. The work could proceed simultaneously in different regions, with no single site becoming a bottleneck. The final act of assembly was almost a ceremonial unveiling, where the grand vision, broken into 1,000 pieces across the landscape, was finally made whole. It turned the impossible into a series of simple, repeatable tasks, proving that the secret to building a wonder was sometimes just knowing how to break it down. The silent stones do not speak, but they do answer questions. When an archaeologist stands before a circle of weathered megaliths, the mystery is not just what it is, but what it means. The grand organizational systems we have described, from shared calendars to master builders, are not pulled from thin air. They are painstakingly reconstructed from a constellation of tiny, physical clues left behind in the earth and on the stone itself. This is the quiet science of interpretation, where the tools of the modern researcher meet the fingerprints of the ancient world. The first and most profound clue is written in light and shadow. The statistical analysis of astronomical alignments has transformed our understanding. It is not enough for one stone to point roughly toward the summer solstice sunrise. To prove a shared, intentional calendar, researchers must survey dozens, sometimes hundreds of monuments across a wide region. They measure the orientation of passages, the sight lines over specific stones, the angles of shadows cast at key dates. When a pattern emerges statistically, when a significant majority of sites in a cultural zone align to the same celestial event, the evidence becomes compelling. It moves from coincidence to code. This analysis reveals that the winter solstice alignment at Newgrange in Ireland is not an isolated feature. It is part of a widespread cultural priority, a shared holy day marked in architecture from the Orkney Islands to the Iberian Peninsula. The stones themselves become a data set, proving that disparate communities were watching the same sky and building to the same silent, celestial timetable. The second clue is locked within the stone's very chemistry. Where did this rock come from? Modern geochemical sourcing techniques, like X-ray fluorescence, can analyze the unique fingerprint of trace elements within a stone. By comparing this signature to geological maps and samples from known quarries, archaeologists can pinpoint a megalith's origin with startling accuracy. This is how we know the blue stones of Stonehenge came from the Preseli Hills in Wales. This simple fact is a revelation. It traces an invisible line on a map, a tangible trade route or transport pathway. The movement of these stones tells a story of purpose, effort, and connection. It transforms a static monument into a node in a dynamic network, proving that materials, and therefore the people who moved them, were traveling across vast cultural landscapes. The third clue is in the shape of things, the comparative study of architectural styles and motifs. Why does a specific type of stone carving, like a concentric circle or a spiral, appear on monuments separated by 1,000 miles of sea? By cataloging these design elements, their frequency, and their evolution, researchers can map cultural currents. It is like tracking a meme across the ancient world. The appearance of a distinctive cup and ring mark in both northern England and Atlantic France suggests a shared symbolic language carried along coastal trade routes. The precise method of constructing a corbelled roof, where stones are layered inward to form a dome, found in both Irish passage graves and early Mediterranean tombs, hints at the diffusion of a sophisticated engineering template, perhaps carried by those mobile master builders. Finally, the humblest evidence often speaks the loudest. The painstaking analysis of a site's microstratigraphy, the layers of soil and debris, can reveal a construction timeline. Scatters of pottery shards can identify the cultural group present. The specific wear patterns on a flint chisel can tell us how a stone was shaped. Each of these fragments is a pixel. Alone, it shows nothing, but when combined with thousands of others from sites across a region, a picture emerges. It is the picture of a system, the consistent use of a certain tool type here, a preferred pottery style there, a repeated method of laying a foundation somewhere else. These patterns are the ghostly imprint of the organizational frameworks we have been exploring. They are the physical evidence of shared knowledge, coordinated labor, and a common vision. This meticulous detective work does not just tell us about stones, it tells us about minds. It allows researchers to slowly, carefully reconstruct the invisible social and intellectual architectures that once guided human hands, turning a landscape of scattered, silent monoliths into a coherent and profoundly human story. The silent clues left by ancient tools and trade routes tell only part of the story. Beneath every organizational system, providing its fundamental rhythm and reason, was the living world itself. The climate and environment were not just a backdrop, they were active participants, the ultimate project managers whose unyielding constraints shaped every decision, from the calendar of labor to the very tools used to move a mountain of stone. These builders possessed a deep, systematic intelligence about their ecological place, an understanding shared across regions facing similar challenges, which became the invisible framework for all their coordination. Consider the relentless sun and the seasonal rains. In the dense jungles of the Maya world, the climate dictated a strict construction calendar. The heavy, torrential downpours of the rainy season made the land a quagmire, turning simple travel into an ordeal and making the transport of massive limestone blocks nearly impossible. So, the great city-states of the region, from Tikal to Palenque, operated on a shared environmental clock. Major construction was pulsed into the dry season. During these months of reliable weather, roads were firm and the workforce, largely drawn from agricultural communities, was available. The corn had been harvested, and the people could turn their collective energy to raising temples and palaces. This created a continent-wide rhythm of activity. Though these cities were often rivals, they were all reading the same environmental memo. The dry season was the time to build, a universal truth that synchronized efforts across the entire Maya sphere, creating a seasonal harmony in their monumental ambitions. Half a world away along the Nile, a different kind of pulse governed everything. The river's annual flood was not a disaster, it was the engine of civilization and the ultimate scheduling tool. When the Nile overflowed its banks, it deposited rich, renewing silt across the farmlands, but it also made farming itself impossible for those crucial months. The state, with brilliant foresight, transformed this agricultural pause into a national construction season. This was the time to mobilize the labor corps, the files, and direct them to the quarries and the pyramid sites. The floodwaters themselves became a logistical highway. The river rose, making it possible to float the colossal granite blocks from distant Aswan right to the foot of the Giza Plateau on barges. The Egyptian calendar was, in essence, a hydrological project plan. The inundation meant quarry and transport. The receding waters meant assembly and precise fitting. This deep synchronization with the river's cycle meant that every community along the Nile, regardless of their local chieftain, was operating on the same state-mandated environmental timetable. The river's rhythm became the kingdom's rhythm. This ecological intelligence extended to the very materials used for the work itself. Before the first stone was moved, builders had to solve the problem of movement. Their cranes and trucks were grown in the forest. The availability of specific local resources directly dictated the engineering methods that could be shared across regions. In cultures that had access to strong, straight timber, the lever and the sledge became the transport methods of choice. A technique developed in one forested valley for moving megaliths using greased wooden rails and rope could easily travel to another region with similar trees. Conversely, in places like Easter Island, which was largely deforested by the time the Great Moai were carved, the methods had to adapt to the available resources. Researchers suggest the famous walking method, where teams rocked the statues forward using ropes, may have emerged from a necessity born of environmental scarcity. The shared knowledge, then, was not just a set of instructions, but a flexible toolkit of solutions for different ecological conditions. Builders in glaciated regions learned to move stones over ice. Builders in muddy deltas learned to use buoyancy and barges. This environmental adaptability was a core part of the shared systematic intelligence, allowing the same overarching goal: to move the immovable to be achieved in 100 different ways, each perfectly tuned to the voice of the local land. This reveals the ultimate layer of coordination. These societies were not just organizing people, they were organizing people in concert with nature. Their shared calendars were ecological calendars. Their logistical networks followed rivers and dry season paths. Their engineering innovations responded to locally available materials. The rhythmic, pulsed nature of multi-region projects we see in the archaeological record, bursts of activity followed by periods of quiet, is not a sign of disorganization. It is the signature of a profound harmony. It is the sound of human ambition listening to the rain, waiting for the flood, and watching the trees grow strong enough to become levers. The environment was the silent partner in every enterprise, the constant whose demands ensured that even the greatest works of humanity remained fundamentally a part of the world they sought to transcend. A treaty signed between kings could do more than end a war. It could begin a temple. This introduces a ninth, deeply political system, the use of diplomatic and royal marriage alliances as formal channels for architectural coordination. When we think of ancient statecraft, we think of borders and trade deals, but one of its most enduring tools was the collaborative construction project. A peace agreement between two rival kingdoms often needed a powerful, visible symbol to cement the new relationship. What better symbol than a shared monument, a physical testament to the alliance that both parties helped to raise? This created a top-down, formalized pipeline for the exchange of the most valuable resource of all, specialized knowledge. Consider the journey of a princess sent to marry a king in a distant land. Her retinue would be large, filled with attendants, priests, guards, and crucially, artisans and builders from her homeland. These were not just companions, they were a living cultural delegation. When she arrived at her new court, her master builders came with her, carrying the complete architectural language of her people. They might introduce a new method for vaulting ceilings, a distinctive style of column, or a novel approach to city planning. The foreign king, eager to honor his new bride and showcase the benefits of the alliance, would often commission a project that utilized this fresh expertise. The result could be a stunning hybrid, a temple that blended the local stonework tradition with the elegant proportions of a far-off civilization. These alliances turned monumental construction into a diplomatic language. A clause in a treaty might specifically call for mutual technical assistance. One kingdom, renowned for its hydraulic engineering, might send experts to help another build an elaborate irrigation system for a new ceremonial complex. In return, they might receive master sculptors to adorn their own palaces. This was a barter system for genius where knowledge itself was the currency of peace. It created a formal, sanctioned reason for the deepest trade secrets of architecture to cross hostile borders. Rival cultures, through the necessities of politics, became reluctant collaborators, and in that collaboration, something entirely new was often born. We can see echoes of this in the archaeological record. Certain monuments display a fusion of styles that is too deliberate to be accidental diffusion. A gate in one empire might bear the mythological creatures of another, carved in a local stone by local hands but following a foreign design. This suggests a direct transfer of artistic templates, likely under the auspices of a royal agreement. The monument itself becomes a frozen moment of diplomacy, a handshake in stone. It shows how the highest levels of political power could directly engineer cultural coordination, mandating a blend of traditions to serve a larger goal of unity and stability. The stones in these cases are not just expressions of belief or skill, but of treaties and weddings, of alliances forged not only by words, but by the shared labor of building something greater than either kingdom alone could conceive. Rivalry can build as powerfully as alliance. The Grand Mound rising in one river valley was not just a spiritual statement, it was a challenge. Across the forest, the chieftain of a neighboring tribe would watch its silhouette grow against the sky, and a potent mix of envy and ambition would take root. If they could raise such a thing, then we must raise something greater. This reveals a shadow system driving coordination, one fueled not by shared belief or trade, but by competition and emulation. When political entities, whether chiefdoms, city-states, or early kingdoms, vied for dominance, architecture became a primary battlefield. The monument was a direct measure of a leader's power, his connection to the gods, and his ability to command the labor and loyalty of his people. A rival, seeing this symbol of authority, would feel compelled to respond in kind. They might not copy the exact design, but they would adopt its language, seeking to build their own version, but bigger, taller, more elaborate. This competitive pressure created a powerful wave of stylistic convergence across regions. Consider the proliferation of massive earthen mounds across the southeastern United States, often referred to as the Mississippian culture. Sites like Cahokia, with its enormous Monk's Mound, did not exist in a vacuum. Their form and scale inspired or pressured other centers across the river networks to construct their own platform mounds and plazas. It was a way to visually claim, we too are a legitimate center of power, we too can orchestrate the landscape. This was not a coordinated plan from a central authority, but a decentralized reaction among peers, a kind of architectural one-upmanship that spread a template as effectively as any trade route. The stepped pyramids of Mesoamerica tell a similar story of competitive emulation. While the basic form served a shared religious function, the specific embellishments, height, and artistic programs became arenas for rivalry. A king in one city might add a more dramatic stairway or a richer facade of carvings, directly challenging the prestige of his neighbor's temple. The desire to outdo one another drove innovation in engineering and art, pushing the scale of what was possible. This system ensured that a successful new design, one that seemed to project greater power or divine favor, would be rapidly adopted and adapted by rivals. It created a form of peer pressure among elites that was incredibly effective at standardizing certain monument types across a cultural landscape. Why build a simple wooden palisade when the polity next door has just finished an imposing stone hill fort? The very definition of security and strength was being rewritten in earth and stone, and to fall behind was to appear vulnerable. This competitive dynamic turned the landscape into a silent, ongoing conversation of assertion and response. Each new construction was both an answer to the last and a question posed to the next. The result was a region that, while politically fractured, developed a coherent architectural identity. The monuments were speaking to each other, not in cooperation, but in a contest that, ironically, bound them together in a shared language of power. The drive to surpass a rival became an unexpected, yet brilliantly effective, engine for coordinated development, proving that sometimes the most powerful organizing force is not a common friend, but a common challenger. The landscape itself became their canvas, and earth their chosen medium. From the winding Ohio River to the great southern flow of the Mississippi, ancient North American cultures undertook a project of breathtaking scale, not in stone but in soil. They built monumental mounds by the thousands, transforming valleys and floodplains into a sacred geometry visible only from the sky or in the mind's eye. These mound builder societies present a profound puzzle, a case study in continent-wide coordination without the glue of an empire. How did communities separated by vast forests and rivers build in such startling harmony? The answer is woven into the shapes of the mounds, the pathways of trade, and the shared stories written in the stars. The mounds themselves are a language. Some are great, flat-topped pyramids, platforms for temples and the homes of leaders, echoing the concept of a world built in tiers. Others are conical, often marking places of remembrance. Then there are the effigy mounds, colossal earthworks shaped like birds, serpents, and bears, so large their form is only clear from above. These were not random sculptures. The Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, with its undulating body and coiled tail, aligns to the summer solstice sunset, its open jaws seeming to swallow the sun. This was a shared cosmology made physical. A community in Wisconsin building a giant bird effigy and a community in Georgia building a platform mound were likely drawing from the same spiritual sourcebook, a common understanding of the tears of the world, the power of animal spirits, and the necessity of aligning their sacred spaces with the cosmos. This shared vision provided the blueprint, ensuring that even without an emperor's decree, separate hands were working toward a unified symbolic goal. That vision traveled on the water. The river systems of North America were the continent's natural highways, and along them moved more than canoes. A dazzling trade in exotic materials connected these distant mound centers. Copper from the Great Lakes, worked into ornate headdresses and ceremonial objects, has been found in mounds in Florida. Marine shells from the Gulf Coast graced burials in the Ohio Valley. This was not mere commerce, it was a ritual exchange. These materials held spiritual power, and their movement along the rivers created a living network. A shell from a distant sea was a tangible piece of a larger, interconnected sacred world. The traders who carried these goods also carried ideas. They would have shared stories of the great mounds they had seen, descriptions of ceremonies, and perhaps even instructions from spiritual leaders. This flow of people and objects created a feedback loop, reinforcing the shared cosmological blueprint and providing the social connections that made large-scale, cooperative labor possible for regional projects. The coordination is etched into the land in ways we are still learning to see. At places like the Newark earthworks in Ohio, complexes of geometric enclosures, circles, and octagons cover an area larger than 200 football fields. Astonishingly, these earthworks align with the complex 18.6-year cycle of the moon's rising and setting, a level of astronomical precision that requires generations of observation and record-keeping. This knowledge did not stay in one valley. The fact that multiple major sites across the Midwest share these precise lunar alignments suggests a shared, sophisticated astronomical tradition, a science passed along those riverine trade routes and maintained by a learned priestly class. Different communities, perhaps only loosely connected politically, were nonetheless united in watching the same sky and marking its most subtle rhythms in Earth. They were participating in a continent-wide conversation with the heavens, using the landscape as their shared notebook. This reveals the mound builders' ultimate achievement. They coordinated not through conquest but through consensus, a consensus built on a deep, shared vision of how the universe worked. The mound was more than a hill, it was an act of world building, a prayer in soil that connected the community to the layers of the sky, the spirits of animals, and the cycles of the moon. By tapping into this common cosmology, transmitted along glittering trails of copper and shell, scattered villages could collectively reshape an entire continent into a sacred map, proving that the most powerful organizing system is sometimes just a story, told well enough to move mountains of Earth. The stones were not meant to be silent. In the deep, subterranean chambers of the hypogeum on Malta, a low chant resonates through the carved limestone, not as a simple echo, but as a distinct, otherworldly hum that seems to come from the walls themselves. This was no accident of architecture. We are now entering the realm of the 10th system, the acoustic and sensory blueprint, where sound itself was a sacred material to be shaped, measured, and precisely engineered into the monument's design. Beyond alignment and geometry, these builders were mastering the physics of perception, creating spaces that would guarantee a specific, repeatable experience for anyone who entered, anywhere in their cultural world. Recent archaeological acoustics has uncovered a startling layer of intention. it is not just that these spaces have interesting acoustics, many caves do. The evidence points to deliberate tuning. In the circular, corbelled chambers of Ireland's Newgrange, specific resonant frequencies cause standing waves, where sound lingers and amplifies in certain spots, perhaps marking them as focal points for ritual speech. In the grand ball courts of ancient Mesoamerica, the parallel walls are not just for the game, they create a remarkable acoustic phenomenon. A hand clap at one end produces a series of distinct, decaying echoes that eerily mimic the sound of a bouncing rubber ball, directly linking the sensory experience to the sacred narrative of the game itself. These are not happy coincidences, they are features. This implies a profound level of shared technical knowledge. To achieve a specific sonic effect, you need more than a good ear. You need an understanding of mathematics, of how sound waves interact with specific dimensions and materials. The builders had to know that a chamber with a diameter of precisely 20 feet, built from a certain density of stone, would resonate at a specific frequency when a drum was struck at its center. This acoustic target became as important as the astronomical alignment. It was a non-negotiable part of the sacred function. Therefore, this knowledge had to be transmitted meticulously from one generation of specialists to the next and across great distances. Imagine the specifications that traveled with a master builder. He would carry not just the geometric plans for a temple, but its sonic profile. The instructions might state that the inner sanctum must produce a reverberation time of 3 seconds for a male voice chanting a particular tone, or that the entrance passage must create a sound shadow, a zone of sudden quiet, to mark the transition from the profane to the sacred world. Achieving this required control over every variable, the smoothness of the walls, the angle of the ceiling, the placement of niches, even the type of plaster used on the surfaces. A slightly different plaster mix could deaden the very resonance the design demanded. This system of acoustic blueprints created a powerful, visceral form of coordination. A pilgrim traveling from one ceremonial center to another, perhaps in a different valley or on a different island, would undergo a nearly identical sensory initiation. As they stepped into the darkened chamber, the same low, resonant hum would rise to meet them. The same echo would transform their chant. The same feeling of sound vibrating in their chest would confirm they were in a place of power. This shared sensory experience was a direct physical proof of a shared cosmological truth. The gods or the ancestors were not just seen in the alignment of the sun, they were heard in the very breath of the stone. The implications are extraordinary. It suggests these cultures were curating consciousness itself, using architecture as a technology to guide the mind and body into a specific state during ritual. The precise echo in a Greek theater ensured every spectator, even in the highest row, felt the emotional weight of the actor's whisper. The disorienting acoustics of a labyrinth might be designed to induce a trance-like state for an initiate. By embedding these acoustic recipes into their architectural tradition, they ensured that the ritual, wherever it was performed, would have the same physiological and psychological impact. The monument was not just a place to perform a ceremony, it was an instrument to be played, and the master builders were the luthiers of the sacred, ensuring every site, though built by different hands, was tuned to the same celestial and sensory key. Even the most brilliant systems could fracture under the weight of a single miscalculation. Scattered across the globe are the silent testimonies of ambition's limit, monuments that were never finished or that fell before their time. These abandoned quarries and sunken foundations are not merely ruins, they are a different kind of blueprint, a map of where the complex machinery of coordination finally broke down. By studying these failures, we gain a stark and invaluable perspective on just how delicate the balance of knowledge, resources, and will truly was. Take the ancient Egyptian pyramid of Meidum. It began as a classic step pyramid, but a later pharaoh ordered it transformed into a true, smooth-sided pyramid. The builders added an outer casing, attempting to alter its fundamental geometry. The result was catastrophic. The new outer layers, built on unstable sand and at an unsound angle, sheared away in a massive collapse, leaving the stark, tower-like core we see today. This was not a failure of labor or supply, but of engineering knowledge and perhaps of communication between generations of architects. The organizational system succeeded in marshalling immense resources, but the technical subsystem, the sacred geometry itself, contained a fatal flaw. The collapse at Meidum became a lesson in stone, one that later pyramid builders studied intently, adjusting their angles and foundations to ensure it would never happen again. Elsewhere, failure came from a severed connection. On the slopes of Roroku, the volcanic quarry on Easter Island, a moai statue lies forever unfinished, still attached to the bedrock. Its carved outline is complete, but it was never freed and walked to its coastal perch. Nearby, another giant toppled and broke in transit. These scenes speak of a coordination network pushed past its breaking point. The most compelling theories suggest that the very act of monument creation, requiring vast amounts of timber for leverage and transport, may have led to the island's deforestation. This ecological collapse would have severed the critical logistical chain, making it impossible to move the statues they had already carved. The social and ritual system that drove the carving continued, but the environmental and material system that enabled transport failed. The quarries were abandoned not for lack of skill or faith, but because the island itself could no longer support the process. Sometimes the failure was one of social cohesion, a breakdown in the very will to build. In the British Isles, we find stone circles that are conspicuously uneven or that clearly lack several of their intended monoliths. These are not ruins of decay, but projects halted midstream. Perhaps a ruling chieftain passed, and his successor lacked the authority to command the labor. Maybe a conflict with a neighboring tribe diverted all resources and hands to fortifications. Or possibly, a shift in religious belief made the completion of the old ritual site suddenly unimportant. The organizational system here was not a machine. It was a living agreement, a fragile consensus. When that consensus shattered, the work simply stopped, leaving a permanent record of a plan interrupted. These negative examples are not footnotes, they are critical data points. A successful pyramid shows us what worked. A collapsed one shows us the precise stress point where the system failed. An unfinished moai highlights the absolute dependency on a specific resource chain. A half-built stone circle reveals that the social contract behind monument building was as vital as the architectural plan. Each failure acts as a diagnostic, isolating a single variable, labor, engineering, ecology, or politics, and demonstrating its essential role in the whole. They force us to appreciate the successes not as inevitable, but as miraculous balancing acts. The great monuments that endured did so because every link in a long and fragile chain held firm. The master builder's knowledge was sound, the trade route stayed open, the community's belief remained strong, and the environment provided just enough. To look at a fallen stone is to understand the immense, sustained effort required to keep one standing for millennia. It reminds us that these ancient systems were not infallible scripts, but living experiments in human collaboration, experiments where the price of a mistake was etched permanently into the landscape. The echoes of those ancient systems are not lost to history, they resonate in the very structures of our modern world. While our tools have evolved from stone hammers to supercomputers, the fundamental human challenge remains strikingly familiar: how to align countless individual efforts toward a single, monumental goal. The organizational genius of the past offers profound, timeless lessons for today's project managers, whether they are building a skyscraper, launching a software platform, or planning a mission to Mars. Consider the master builder, that elite technician traveling between sacred sites. His direct counterpart today is the specialist consultant or the lead systems architect. Just as the master builder carried the complete mental library of stoneworking and celestial alignment, a modern consultant arrives with a deep mastery of a specific technology or methodology. They are the human vessels of specialized knowledge, moving from one corporate project to another, ensuring that a data center in Singapore and one in Sweden are built to the same rigorous standards of efficiency and resilience. They translate a universal blueprint into local reality, proving that some roles are eternal. The ancient standardized unit, the megalithic yard, finds its parallel in our modern protocols and standards. Think of the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, which provides universal specifications for everything from manufacturing tolerances to quality management. These are our global megalithic yards. They allow an engine part made in Germany to fit perfectly into an assembly in Japan, or a software module written in California to integrate seamlessly with a platform developed in India. Just as the ancient unit enabled decentralized builders to work in concert, modern standards allow globally dispersed teams to collaborate on a single, complex product, confident that their individual contributions will slot together without costly rework. The celestial calendar, that perfect natural scheduler, is mirrored in our synchronized digital timelines and Gantt charts. Ancient priests watched the solstice to know when to raise a capstone. Today, project managers watch a shared digital dashboard that shows critical path dependencies in real time. The principle is identical, creating a single, authoritative timeline that everyone, everywhere on the project can see and adhere to. A delay in shipping a component from one continent triggers an automated alert to the assembly team on another, just as a storm delaying a stone barge on the Nile would have required recalibrating the work schedule on the plateau. The ancient emphasis on a shared vision, a unifying ideology, is perhaps the most crucial lesson. Before a single line of code is written or a foundation is poured, successful modern projects establish a powerful why. This is the project's mission statement, its core narrative. It answers the question, what are we building and for whom? When this vision is communicated clearly and passionately, it acts as that non-physical blueprint. A software engineer in Austin and a UX designer in Stockholm, though they may never meet, make daily decisions guided by that common purpose. They don't need micromanagement from a central authority because they are all reading from the same strategic text. This empowers decentralized innovation within a unified framework. Furthermore, the ancient practice of modular design and prefabrication is the direct ancestor of modern agile development and platform engineering. The builders of Stonehenge treated trilithons as interchangeable components. Today, software teams build with reusable code libraries and application programming interfaces, or a PIS. A team can work independently on a payment processing module, while another builds a user authentication module, knowing they will connect via a standardized interface. This parallel work dramatically accelerates development and contains risk, just as it did in the quarry yards of antiquity. Even the ancient reliance on oral archives and initiation schools has a modern echo in our practices of knowledge management and mentorship programs. Critical institutional knowledge is no longer stored solely in chants, but in comprehensive wikis, video tutorials, and rigorous onboarding processes. The goal, however, is the same: to prevent vital expertise from walking out the door when a key employee leaves, and to ensure that every new team member is initiated into the project's core methodologies and culture. What these parallels reveal is that human ingenuity in organization is not a product of the digital age, but a deep historical constant. The problems of communication, logistics, quality control, and motivation are ancient. The solutions devised by those early societies, leveraging shared belief, standardized tools, and synchronized rhythms, were the original operating systems for collective achievement. When a modern project manager builds a buffer into a timeline or creates a cross-functional team, they are, in essence, speaking a very old language. They are acknowledging that to build anything of lasting significance, you must first architect the human systems that will bring it to life, systems that must be as resilient, adaptable, and clearly communicated as those that once raised circles of stone against the endless sky. These separate systems were never truly isolated. They functioned like the organs in a living body, each performing a vital task, but only creating life through their constant, intricate interaction. To understand the full scope of ancient coordination, we must stop looking at the pieces and start seeing the integrated machine. Picture a vast, invisible network laid over the ancient landscape. At its nodes are the monument sites themselves, but connecting those nodes are not single threads but braided cables, where each strand is a different system, all reinforcing the same signal. Consider a single strand, the trade route. It does not merely transport stone. Flowing along that same physical path is the master builder, a carrier of the technical system. He shares news of astronomical events, part of the scheduling system, with merchants he meets. Those merchants carry pendants carved with spiral symbols, elements of the shared iconographic language. The route itself follows river confluences considered sacred, guided by the principles of geomantic planning. One physical journey is simultaneously a transfer of goods, expertise, calendar knowledge, artistic templates, and spiritual geography. The systems are bundled together, traveling the same highways. Now look at the moment of construction itself. A community gathers to raise a lintel at the summer solstice. The date comes from the astronomical system. The chants that synchronize their pull are part of the communication protocol. Their willingness to contribute labor stems from the social system of shared obligation and festivity. The precise measurement of the lintel's position uses the standardized unit, and the reason they are building this specific shape, aligned to that specific sun, is dictated by the unifying ideology. In that single, coordinated heave, 5 distinct systems converge to produce one physical result. This interdependence means failure in one area could cascade. If a shift in climate disrupts a trade route, it does not just starve a project of material. It also cuts the flow of master builders and new artistic ideas, isolating the community's technical knowledge. If a ruling lineage falls, disrupting the social system of labor mobilization, it does not just stop work. It breaks the chain of oral transmission that preserved the astronomical data needed for alignment. The systems propped each other up. The ideology justified the social system, which enabled the logistics, which relied on the technical knowledge, which was codified by the communication protocols. Remove one pillar and the entire integrated framework begins to wobble. This synthesis reveals the true nature of these projects. They were not first and foremost architectural, they were socio-technical. The stone monument was merely the most durable output of a vast living process. The real creation was the network itself, the dynamic web of relationships, knowledge, and shared purpose that spanned regions. The finished temple or stone circle was simply the place where that network became momentarily visible, where all the threads were tied together in a permanent knot. This explains the family resemblance across continents. It was not that everyone copied a design, but that different cultures facing similar human challenges evolved similar integrated frameworks. They all needed ways to store knowledge, move materials, schedule work, and motivate builders. The solutions they found, while culturally distinct in their expression, often converged on the same fundamental principles of network organization. What we witness in the silent alignment of stones is the echo of that network's peak operation. It is the signature of a culture operating in a state of profound integration, where belief, knowledge, economy, and society were all tuned to the same frequency, all humming with the same purpose. The monument is the fossil of that harmony. A single spiral carved in stone can tell two very different stories. One narrative speaks of a shared language carried across continents by ancient travelers. The other, simpler story suggests that human minds, faced with similar materials and similar questions, often arrive at similar answers independently. To build a complete picture, we must give this second story its due respect, examining the skeptical view with the same care we give to the stones themselves. The principle often invoked here is Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is usually the best. From this perspective, the parallels we see might not be threads of a vast network, but the natural, unconnected flowering of common human ingenuity. If two cultures both have access to large stones and a desire to build something impressive, is it any wonder they both might stack them into a pyramid shape? A pyramid is, after all, a stable and logical way to build tall with stone. The need to track time for agriculture could lead multiple societies to notice the solstice sun and mark its position without any need to share that discovery. This viewpoint argues that we, as modern observers, are prone to connecting dots that were never linked, weaving grand narratives of contact and coordination from what was merely convergent cultural evolution. This critique extends to the methodology of interpretation itself. How can we definitively prove a transferred idea? Finding a similar stone circle in two locations could mean a shared blueprint, or it could mean two groups independently figuring out that a circle is a good shape for gathering people around a central focus. The beautiful, precise geometry noted by researchers like Alexander Thom could be evidence of a shared megalithic yard, or it could reflect a common human propensity for using the body, the pace, the fathom, the reach as a natural ruler, leading to similar but not identical units emerging in different places. The patterns we see in astronomical alignment might be statistically significant, but skeptics rightly ask if we are only selecting the sites that fit our theory, while ignoring the many monuments that do not align so perfectly. These are vital questions that keep historical inquiry honest. They force us to move beyond romantic assumptions and demand robust evidence. Engaging with them does not weaken the thesis of ancient organizational systems, it refines and strengthens it. The key is in the cumulative weight of the evidence and in the specificity of the parallels. While a pyramid shape might be an obvious solution, the precise slope angle of a pyramid in Mesoamerica matching one in Egypt is not. While observing the solstice is a global possibility, constructing a long, narrow passage that admits a single blade of light only on the morning of the winter solstice, as seen at Newgrange and other Atlantic Passage graves, is a highly specific and complex solution that seems less likely to spring up independently dozens of times. The argument for sophisticated networks gains its power not from any single piece of evidence, but from the convergence of multiple, independent systems. It is one thing for two cultures to build with large stones. It is another for them to build with large stones using the same unit of measurement, aligning them to the same subtle lunar cycle, decorating them with the same unique symbolic motif, and sourcing those stones from distant, specialized quarries using similar transport methods. When these threads, metrological, astronomical, iconographic, and logistical, all weave together repeatedly across a geographic region, the probability of pure coincidence diminishes dramatically. The organizational systems we have explored provide a framework that explains this convergence elegantly. They show how a shared idea could travel and be adapted, not merely why similar ideas might appear. The skeptic's razor is a necessary tool, cutting away the fanciful and the unsupported. What remains after its careful application is not a diminished story, but a clearer, more compelling one. It is the story not of a single miraculous contact, but of the slow, persistent, brilliant work of building and maintaining the channels, through trade, through pilgrimage, through master builders and shared ritual, that allowed humanity's greatest ideas to resonate across the ancient world, turning isolated achievements into a harmonious, whispered conversation across millennia. The final stone placed was a declaration of connection. Our journey across these 10 organizational systems, from the unifying ideology to the tuned acoustic chamber, reveals a prehistoric world pulsing with a quiet, systematic brilliance. These were not isolated tribes erecting random stones, but participants in a vast, living network. The celestial calendar, the master builders guild, the standardized measurement, the trade route, the symbolic language, the communication protocols, the geomantic plan, the social labor systems, the competitive emulation, and the sensory blueprint, these were not separate ideas. They were interlocking parts of a single, sophisticated engine for collective creation. What we have been exploring is not merely how they moved mountains of stone, but how they moved mountains of human potential. The true wonder, the ultimate monument, was never the pyramid or the circle alone. It was the invisible architecture of collaboration that made them possible, the web of shared knowledge, synchronized belief, and coordinated effort that spanned continents and centuries. These stones stand not as relics of a mysterious, lost people, but as enduring proof of a profoundly human talent. They testify to our ancient and ongoing capacity to organize, to dream on a grand scale, and to weave our individual efforts into something that transcends any single lifetime. When you next see a photograph of a lone standing stone on a misty moor, or walk the grounds of a great earthwork, see it differently. See it not as an abandoned thing, but as a permanent knot in that vast, invisible network. It is a fossilized moment of human connection, a testament to what we can achieve when we align our hands, our minds, and our hearts toward a common horizon. The story of these monuments is ultimately our story, one of reaching across distance and difference to build something meant to last forever. If this exploration of ancient systems resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the deep patterns of history. We would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these organizational feats from the ancient world amazes you the most? Share your perspective